Tonight on Land Speculation, it is Bible Stream Part 4. We will tackle the story of Moses, the deliverance of the Israelites, well, first into and then out of Egypt. We're going to talk about the 10 plagues on Egypt. We're going to talk about the deliverance across the Red Sea. We'll talk about the worship of false idols and golden calves, the 10 commandments and the tabernacle, and the journey of the Israelites through the desert over 40 years, leading to the death of Moses. Excitement abounds in the book of Exodus, as well as beyond in the books of Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, and more. That all tonight on Land Speculation.
Quack, 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 quack. Quack, 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 quack. Quack, 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 quack. Quack, 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 quack.
This is Land, that ain't just speculation. That's something we do with Kinky.
Quack, 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 quack. Quack, 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 quack. Quack, 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 quack.
Honk, 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 honk. Where's your money?
That would be weird.
Ha, 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 ha. Ha, 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 ha. Let's see. I eat bars of soap for breakfast. I love bars of soap. After midnight, things get weird.
Quack, quack.
Oh no.
Let it go. Let it go. Cock.
I like that one.
Quack, 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 quack. Quack, quack, quack. Quack, 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 quack. Come on, ducks.
All right, guys, welcome to Land Speculation on YouTube. We are, as we said, live with part 4 of our Bible Stream series, which has taken off, and we're now getting into the meat of things. So we're going to dig in tonight with more as we recap a little bit of what we started in the book of Exodus and kind of move into the kind of very adventurous story of the Israelites in Egypt and more. So lots of fun stuff to get into. Thank you guys for joining us. Quiet Castle, Jeanette, and James Games are the medal winners here tonight. Congratulations. Skitty Squirrel is also with us, giving us 5 ducks. Appreciate that. Michael Frankowiak is here. Ronald McFondle is here. Very excited about Moses. John Johnson is also here. Also very excited. Thumbing up his 4 hands. Let's see. We also have... Did I catch Skitty Squirrel? Hey, Skitty Squirrel. Emerald is here. Hey, Emerald. Good to see you. Adrian Gutierrez is here as well. Bequeathius is here. Calming the Chaos is here. It's a party, guys, here on Land Speculation tonight. So, as you guys know, we have been kind of digging deep periodically into this series on the Bible. We said for years we were going to do this series on the Bible, and only recently have we really dug into it. And we've been trying to do one or two of these a week, and so far we've made some progress, although we have, the overwhelming majority of the Bible to continue to kind of explore. Although we've tackled some pretty important stuff out of the gate. We did a little bit back a bit of a story on kind of the general gist of the Bible. And then, of course, we dug through Genesis on a couple of different streams where we talked about the kind of beginning of the earth, which is pretty darn significant. Genesis is very, very interesting, sort of went us from the beginning of the earth all the way down into these kind of genealogical stories that sort of winnow in on the family of Abraham, who was this guy that God kind of picked somewhat out of the blue because of his righteousness, and then basically picked his family to become the foundation of this sort of tribe, this sort of chosen tribe, which is the people of Israel. And that's kind of where we're going to pick up here. So let's kind of dig in, guys. If you wouldn't mind out of the gate here, dropping us a like and a subscribe on the video, I appreciate that. Those likes help us out with YouTube. The subscribes help you guys know when we're on. So please make sure you've dropped a like and dropped a subscribe. Of course, we have our Discord, which is accessible to anyone who wants to join. And of course, we have our Duck Fund, which is our PayPal link if anybody wants to help support the stream. We appreciate the contributions on behalf of the channel here. If you missed our content last week, we did some interesting stuff. In addition to our Bible stream, we did kind of a deep dive on Super Tuesday, which was more than just news. We delved into a lot of interesting things, including who we think Trump's vice president is going to be. If you're curious, check out the stream. We delved into the most liberal big cities in America in talking about the Washington, D.C. primary. And of course, we talked about the best soups. The best soups. And if you want to know the answer to that, go back and watch the stream. We also did a live outdoor stream focused on the State of the Union address. So we were at the Capitol and we got to see Joe Biden's motorcade. I don't know if you look closely enough, maybe we get to see Joe Biden as he goes by. We also got to see the dismantling of the border around the U.S. Capitol. And lots of fun with Jersey barriers moving around. So, there are no rats in the Bible, says Emerald. There are lots of fun animals in the Bible, and in fact, God is a big, big, big fan of animals. It's something that we learn pretty early and pretty often in the Bible. God is a fan of, he's a fan of basically, first he makes all the animals, but then he, wants people to sacrifice animals to him a lot. So it's one of the things we have learned so far. We're getting to know, over the course of the beginning of the Bible, a little bit of the, would you say it, the personality of God, sort of God's relationship with humankind. Obviously he creates the earth, he populates it with, us, people, with sort of purview over all the animals and plants. And then, as we are prone to do, people were not good a few times over, and God was not happy about that, and he went through various punishments, including like destroying the entire world with a giant flood. He, of course, put a whole lot of like permanent punishments on Adam and Eve that we are all now sort of bearing the brunt of. And eventually, somehow, this sort of what begins as the story in Genesis of this kind of righteous guy, Abraham, and his sons, ultimately turns into a story that becomes a little bit depressing by the end of the book of Genesis, because Abraham's family, over the course of his lifetime, his son Isaac, his son Jacob, and his son Joseph, goes from being basically God's chosen family to making their way out of what eventually God sort of redeclares to be the promised land into Egypt, where they become enslaved by Pharaoh and the Egyptians for some 400 years. So by the time we get done with the book of Exodus, or by the time we get done with the book of Genesis, which is the first book of the Bible, we have basically traveled from the beginning of time, however far back you think that is, We have kind of begun the genealogy of the tribe of Abraham, and we have made it to about the year 1500-ish. So Abraham starts like the year 2000-ish, and we get to about the year 1500-ish. These are, of course, BC years. And when we end the book of Genesis, which starts with all this promise and the creation of the world, we end up with this sort of chosen tribe enslaved in Egypt. And I don't know, when you sort of think about it holistically, it's kind of a downer when you get to the end of Genesis. But there's a lot more of the Bible to get through. And of course, Genesis is just the first book, and it is a big, 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 big book of the Bible, because we have to sort of explain through Genesis how we became to be as not just like a species of humans, but as like an entire universe. And that's a pretty big part of the story of, everything. So Genesis is followed, of course, by the books of Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, the next 4 books of the Pentateuch. Genesis and Exodus are like these big kind of historical narratives. Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy are a little bit maybe less significant in that they deal with like kind of more isolated aspects of that kind of early trajectory of the tribe of Israel. They talk about rules, they talk about some of the transgressions of the Israelites, and then Deuteronomy is mostly kind of a recap. And then after that, we have like 12 books of history of kind of what happens to the tribe of Israel after they wander the desert upon being delivered out of Egypt. So those will move a little bit quicker. We've sort of taken our time here through Genesis and Exodus because they are really, really, really significant books. And they tell these like epic narratives, these sort of all-time stories, and they sort of set the stage for everything that happens after. So after this stream, when hopefully we're able to kind of get through the book of Exodus, things are going to pick up the pace a little bit. So we're going to learn about all these sort of interesting rules and, kind of try to figure out like why God was so picky about so many things over the course of these next few books. So anyway, lots more to come. Of course, we've got the whole Old Testament, we've got the whole New Testament. We're going to try to keep kind of cranking on this and trying to, tackle this in as sort of lay speak, if you will, as we possibly can. I mean, our objective here is to kind of work together through the Bible. I'm not a biblical scholar. We're kind of doing all of this with these caveats. Number one, we can't cover everything in the Bible. There's just too much. The Bible's a really, really, really big and old and long and significant collection of important things. And I'm not a biblical scholar. So, I'm just kind of reading this, and we're trying to dissect it together. We're trying to do this in a way that is respectful of everyone's different beliefs, whether you are like really, really, really an expert in the Bible, or whether you kind of don't even really believe in the Bible. You probably believe in the Bible. Like, you've probably seen a Bible. If you don't believe the Bible exists, I can assure you it does. But how much of the Bible you choose to believe and how sort of literally you choose to believe it is a matter of perspective and belief. So we're going to try to sort of appeal to the, beliefs and sensibilities of everyone. We're asking you to sort of bear with us as we do that. But I also love to hear your input and your feedback, and we've got a religion channel set up on the Discord, so people want to give their input into that. I really appreciate that. I know some people have been tossing their thoughts in there, and that is super helpful for me, frankly, as I kind of develop some of these thoughts that we're going to share with you. So anyway, the book of Exodus. The book of Exodus is... on the heels of the book of Genesis, which is like super, super, super epic, the book of Exodus is also really significant. Like Genesis, it is a really, really, really long book. Neither is the longest book in the Bible, but they are third and fourth, and they are almost the same length. And in our proprietary model of highest ranked books of the Bible, Exodus is pretty high up there. It's a 0.91. It's not quite as high as Genesis because, however epic the stories of Exodus are, like the founding of the universe is pretty darn significant. So, it's not the size that matters, is common in the case. Well, it depends what we're talking about, Anyway. The book of Exodus is pretty like it's a kind of a cohesive story. I mean, it's a cool story. It's obviously it wouldn't have been made into one of the most epic films of all time if it weren't a pretty cool story. Now, we say cool as in it's a fascinating story. It also involves like a lot of suffering, a lot of like kind of inexplicability, and also, a story of deliverance. And, we'll get to the Ten Commandments here because that is pretty significant. Jay Lou's asking who is doing the ranking in our proprietary model here. So we did a kind of broad scan of a lot of different sources across the internet and kind of what people across the internet were saying were they thought were the most significant or their favorite books of the Bible. We put together a mathematical model for how to kind of assess all the books of the Bible, and don't worry too much about the specifics of the decimals. But, I guess you could say like Genesis is like an A+ book. Exodus is like an A-, but that's probably undervaluing Exodus here. So, anyway. So, one of the things we're tracking like at the end of Genesis was this kind of back and forth of this tribe, the Israel. It's again the descendants of Abraham, between these different sort of areas of this, relatively small part of the world. I mean, this is basically the site of present-day Egypt, or present-day Egypt, but also present-day Israel. And it's a really, really, really tiny piece of the world in the aggregate. But it was a big population center back when the Bible was being authored, and this sort of family of Abraham, the Israelites, end up kind of going back and forth a fair bit between this land known as Canaan, which was sort of identified as the Promised Land, and Egypt, which is across the Red Sea. And there's a lot of back and forth going on. And some of it seems kind of inexplicable as you go through the first few books of the Bible. And we're going to deal with a little bit more of that here in the book of Exodus. Basically, I mean, what's happened at this point is Abraham, he and his family basically started over kind of more near Canaan, and God basically told them, you should go to Egypt. And God basically like warned them that it was going to kind of not be very good for a while. And he said, but you should do this because eventually I will deliver your people. And it's kind of confusing, but Abraham is like, as we learn in Genesis, like Abraham of all characters so far in the Bible is extremely, extremely obedient and trusting and has tremendous faith, and whatever God asks him to do, he basically does essentially unquestioningly. And so he basically takes his family to Egypt, and again, as we get to the end of Genesis, his family ends up enslaved in Egypt. And stuff is like not so good here. Again, this is around 1600 BC, where Exodus picks up. And the reason Exodus kind of picks up here is that it's somewhere around this time, in fact, probably around the year 1526, that one of the most significant figures in the entire Bible, who is Moses, ends up being born. And Moses, while he eventually ends up as this tremendously significant figure that's parting the Red Sea, doesn't start out that way. In fact, he is lucky to be alive at all. He is obviously of Hebrew birth. Of course, the Hebrews, the Israelites are enslaved at the beginning around the time of the beginning of his life. But at the time, Pharaoh has basically decreed that he's going to kill all the baby boys, or all the firstborn baby boys of Hebrew descent. And so Moses' mother goes into a panic and essentially kind of gets rid of him. He basically Moses' mother basically sort of looks at Moses. He's this beautiful child. He was cared for at home for 3 months. And then she basically puts him in a basket. She ships him down the Nile because she doesn't want him to get killed by Pharaoh's efforts to try to kill all the firstborn baby boys. She rather lose her son than have Moses get killed by Pharaoh, which I guess, it's kind of a move that most parents would make, I guess, faced with that choice, although I'm sure it was difficult. And it just so happens that instead of dying as he sails down the river. Moses gets really lucky. And it just so happens that a woman pulls him out of the water. And the woman that pulls him out of the water just happens to be the Pharaoh's daughter. Like, what are the chances of that? Anyway, Pharaoh's daughter pulls him out of the water and decides, like, she's going to raise him as her own son. So, what a stroke of luck for Moses in a way, that he basically goes from being, just sort of a baby of the people, and ends up now being like one of the most significant figures in Egypt just by dint of this circumstance. Anyway, he kind of goes through his life. Eventually, he gets a little bit of wanderlust. I guess somehow he sort of realizes he is in fact of Hebrew descent, and around the age of 40, he kind of goes through this little bit of a midlife crisis, and he starts kind of looking into how the Israelites are being treated. And he gets really upset when he sees that the Israelites are being really kind of abused by the Egyptians. Again, they're stuck in slavery here. And so he kills an Egyptian. And he thought that basically this would help his people like really understand him, and suddenly he would have this kind of bond with the Israelites. In fact, that's not really true. They actually become very skeptical and afraid of him. It kind of turns into this thing where Moses has this like kind of crisis of confidence in his life here, kind of in early Exodus. Well, he basically ends up leaving Egypt. Like he's just like, I don't like how the Egyptians are treating my people, but my people don't like me. I'm just gonna like go get the hell out of here and go in the desert and just sort of have my midlife crisis. And basically what happens is he wanders out to the desert, and while he wanders out to the desert, basically crosses out of Egypt into the desert between Egypt and Canaan. And while he's there, he just kind of encounters this miraculous thing, which is the story of the burning bush. So essentially, like, I don't know how you'd react if you encountered a burning bush. I mean, just a bush that was like burning randomly in the middle of the desert. Anyway, while he's sort of out in the desert here, an angel appears to Moses in the flames of the burning bush near Mount Sinai, which ends up being quite significant later on. Moses is obviously amazed. He goes and looks at the bush. And when he goes and looks at the bush, he hears God's voice. And God tells him, "I'm the God of your ancestors, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob." And Moses trembles in fear. And God tells him to take your sandals off, for the place you are standing is holy ground. I've seen the cruel suffering of my people in Egypt. I've heard their groans, and I will have come down to set them free. Come now, I will send you to Egypt. So basically, like, God tells Moses, like, you need to go back to Egypt. And you need to, not flee your people. You actually are a really significant figure, and you've got to go find a way to set them free. And so Moses is pretty, God's pretty impressive here, talking through a burning bush. So Moses basically believes God. He makes his way back across the Red Sea into Egypt. And this is kind of where you start seeing this set of confrontations between Moses and Pharaoh. So again, Moses has this sort of leg up on everyone else because he's like deemed as essentially, he was sort of raised by Pharaoh's family. And that's, so basically he has the ear of Pharaoh. And that's pretty significant. And so he basically tries and goes to like get Pharaoh to listen to him. And, Moses starts kind of pulling on the ear of Pharaoh, telling him like, you've got these Israelites enslaved under your watch. That doesn't seem very nice. Maybe you should, let them go. And it kind of like escalates a bit. And there's like a lot going on here. On the one hand, like the Israelites are being a little bit imperfect. They're doubting God. On the other hand, Pharaoh is kind of not doing a very nice thing here by enslaving them. And Moses just kind of takes it upon himself to, try to convince Pharaoh to let them go. And this becomes like a big part of the plot of the movie, The Ten Commandments. And we talked about this a little bit on our last stream. So I'm not going to go into all of the detail once more, because some of you guys have already heard this. And if you haven't watched our previous streams, this is part 4 of our Bible stream series here at Land Speculation. But basically what happens is Moses initiates 10 plagues on Egypt at God's command, as part of God's plan to demonstrate his power, trying to compel Pharaoh anyway, to release the Israelites from slavery in Egypt. Moses goes out of his way pretty extensively to try to warn Pharaoh that, you probably want to listen to me. This is going to be pretty significant stuff when it happens. And Pharaoh basically is like, no way. There's no way that anything you can do is going to be that powerful or that bad. I don't really believe in your God. Bring it on. And so, over the course of a big chunk of the book of Exodus, Moses, channeling God, basically goes and unleashes this series of incredibly intense plagues on Egypt, kind of one by one. And each time he basically goes and God tells him strike your staff on the ground. I'm going to unleash this plague. Lo and behold, the plague does get unleashed. Afterwards, after the plague gets unleashed, basically, Pharaoh's like, wow, that was pretty impressive. Maybe your God is real after all. And he says, maybe I will let your people go. And then almost every time he basically doesn't follow through on his promise to let the people go. And so Moses keeps up in the ante and up in the ante and up in the ante. And Pharaoh continues to not act. So the first plague that gets unleashed is that basically the Lord turns the Nile and all of the water within Egypt into blood. Basically, Moses says, I'm going to strike the surface of the river with this stick. The water will be turned into blood. The fish will die. The river will stink so much that the Egyptians will not be able to drink from it. And that basically is what happens. The fish in the river did die. It did smell so bad the Egyptians could not drink from it, and there was blood everywhere. Somehow, amazingly, the Bible says that Pharaoh's magicians were able to do the same thing by the means of their magic. So they didn't even have God on their side, and somehow they managed to turn the Nile into blood. And it's I don't know, that's pretty amazing. If you didn't have God on your side, they were able to actually do that. And basically, the Egyptian people get really desperate, and they start digging for well water into the ground, which in Egypt I'm sure is not readily found. So basically, God does this for 7 days before he, returns water to the Nile. So that's the first plague that Moses, channeling God, unleashes on Egypt. And of course, Pharaoh doesn't bite after the first plague. The second plague is that God promises to punish the country of Egypt with frogs. And I don't know, there's sort of an interesting, I don't know what's going on with God here. The creativity of the plagues is kind of interesting. Who would have thought of covering the country in frogs as the second plague? Anyway, the promise is that the Nile will be so full of frogs that they will leave and go into your palace, and your bedroom, your bed, the houses of your officials and your people, and even into your ovens and baking pans. They will jump on you, your people, and all your officials. I guess that would be fairly unpleasant. And basically, of course, that's what happens. Then the frogs start dying, and the Egyptians have to create these big heaping piles of stinking frogs. And even after this, Pharaoh, despite having now seen like 2 miracles, just kind of, I guess he thinks it's like a coincidence or something. He doesn't bite. Or maybe he just thinks that the Egyptians can sort of outlast these plagues that are now being unleashed on them. Okay, then come a couple of plagues that are about bugs. The 3rd and 4th plagues. First, the Lord God tells Moses to strike the ground, and all the land of Egypt will be changed into gnats. So basically all the dust in the air is going to turn into gnats, which is going to cover the people and the animals. And this time, Pharaoh's magicians try and fail to actually make gnats appear themselves. So I guess they were able to make blood happen, but not gnats happen. But even after this, Moses tells him God has done this. But the king is still stubborn and doesn't listen to Moses or Aaron. So then, after the gnats, Moses goes and he basically creates a bunch of flies, which is the 4th plague. The houses of the Egyptians will be so full of flies and the ground will be covered with them. But the areas where the Egyptians, or the areas where the Israelites reside, are not going to have flies. And so that, in turn, is what happens. And the king's starting to kind of come around here on plague number 4, because this is starting to seem like more than a coincidence. In fact, at this point, the king is basically telling Moses, like, go and offer sacrifices to your God. And it's like the king's kind of like the waffling here. He's not quite sure what to do. And it seems like Moses and the Pharaoh kind of have this interesting relationship. Like, it's like, on the one hand, of course, they're sort of enemies here, but they also seem to like communicate in a fairly peer-like way, even as Moses is punishing the Egyptian people through all these plagues. I think that is one of the sort of ethical conundra here, as all these plagues get unleashed on the nation of Egypt. I mean, the Pharaoh is the one who is responsible for enslaving the Israelites. So why are all the otherwise, I guess, innocent people of Egypt being punished by God with all these things that are basically ruining their ability to farm and live and things like that? Anyway, even after the flies, the king is still stubborn and would not let the people go. So then Moses comes up with a 5th plague. And he says that this time he's going to punish Egypt by sending a terrible disease on all the country's animals, on all the horses, on all the donkeys, and all the camels, cattle, sheep, and goats. And again, he says, like, I'm not going to punish the animals of the Israelites, but I will punish the animals of the Egyptians, just to prove to you that this is real. But still, Pharaoh is stubborn and does not let the people go. And so Moses has to continue onward with a 6th plague, this time boils. The Lord tells Moses, take a few handfuls of ashes from a furnace. Moses shall throw them into the air in front of the king. They will spread out like fine dust over all the land of Egypt, and everywhere they will produce boils that will become open sores on the people and the animals. And so this one's kind of, I mean, this had to be unpleasant, you think. And I guess all the people, including Pharaoh himself, get covered with these boils, which had to be very painful and I assume like itchy and, prone to infection and things like that. But again, the king doesn't listen. So you're starting to wonder, like, how many plagues is it going to take for Pharaoh to finally let the people go? And I guess the Pharaoh is sort of thinking, like, we need the labor or something, like the slave labor from the Israelites. It's, it seems almost inexplicable, his stubbornness at this point. And, I think what's interesting a little bit about this is that, although at times the Bible kind of gets, like, people are very critical of the Bible for, not really overtly condemning things like slavery in an era where, of course, it was pervasive across the landscape. But there is this sort of overt undertone in this, in the book of Exodus here that, like, certainly Pharaoh, everybody sort of, they all know that, like, this, in the enslaving of the Egyptian people is wrong. Now, is that wrong because slavery innately is wrong? Or is that wrong just because these are the chosen people of God's, and therefore, enslaving them is kind of a bad idea? This kind of goes onward, like with this sort of underlying premise that, of course, this is, like, everybody knows this is bad, but Pharaoh's continuing to do it anyway. So after the boils comes hail. Moses basically tells Pharaoh that the country's going to basically be covered with hail. A heavy hailstorm as Egypt has never known in all of its history. And he basically warns Pharaoh that, like, you should tell all your people to basically go lock up all your livestock and everything else you have out in the open and put it under shelter, because hail is going to fall so hard that anything that's outside is going to die. And some people obeyed and put their animals inside, and some people didn't obey and basically ended up, they didn't obey. Their animals were outside and they did die. And this is, like, starting to get to the Pharaoh a little bit here. The king sort of, like, at this point, like, he confesses that I have sinned. The Lord is right, and my people are in the wrong. Pray to the Lord, we've had enough of this thunder and hail. I promise to let you go. You don't have to stay here any longer. So basically, the Pharaoh he's kind of giving in here on, this is what, Plague 8 or Plague 7? This is Plague 7. And, basically all the crops of the country are ruined. It's real bad. But, although the king sort of realizes at this point he has sinned, he doesn't end up giving in. He kind of, like, goes back on his commitment. And he turns stubborn again, in part because I think he has people working for him that are stubborn. And so it goes on. Plague 8, the locusts. They already had a couple of bug plagues. I'm not sure why locusts would have been, a new thing. But there's a little bit more negotiation between Moses and the Pharaoh. And then Moses tells him, well, if you keep being stubborn, I'm going to bring locusts into the country. They're going to be so many that they will completely cover the ground. They're going to eat everything that the hail did not destroy, even the trees that are left. They're going to fill your palaces and the houses of all your officials and all your people. And it will be worse than anything your ancestors ever saw. At this point, the king and his officials are sort of confiding amongst each other, and they're going like, how long is this Moses guy going to keep giving us trouble? And they basically tell the Pharaoh, like, don't you realize that Egypt is completely ruined? So they kind of confer a little bit. And they kind of get into this negotiation with Moses about, like, okay, the Israelite men, you can be free. Like, if that will convince you to, like, stop having your God inflict plagues in our country, the men can be free, but you will never take your women and children. And, like, that would be a pretty crazy thing if Moses would have been like, okay, we'll just leave all our women and children behind. Done deal. I'm not sure why the Pharaoh thought this was going to work, but this is like the Pharaoh's bargaining position here, and Moses rejects it, and he brings the locusts anyway. And once again, not surprisingly, the Pharaoh is stubborn, but like he also has to be not surprised that it's happening, because you're 8 plagues in. Like, there's a pretty good track record here that whatever Moses says is going to happen. And so it does. But Pharaoh's still stubborn. This is like the most stubborn guy that has ever lived. This Pharaoh guy. So we're on plague 9 here. Like, 9's a lot. This time Moses promises darkness is going to come and cover the entire land of Egypt. And of course darkness does come, and the Egyptians couldn't see each other, and no one left their house during that time because it would have been impossible to see. But somehow the Israelites still have light where they're living, which had to be a pretty spectacular scene. Sometimes you see that like at the edge of a hurricane, where like on the one side it's really, really, really dark, and then on the other side it's like, sunny. The Pharaoh's like pretty sold on this one. He says, "You may go and worship the Lord, even your women and children may go with you, but your sheep, goats, and cattle must stay here." So Pharaoh's giving in on almost everything at this point, but not the sheep, goats, and cattle. So, like you think he'd just kind of give in at this point. You're 9 plagues in. Moses is like, okay, that's not going to cut it. We're going to keep going with this, Pharaoh, until you let our people go. And somehow, the Bible says the Lord made the king stubborn. So, like, is Pharaoh just being stubborn, or is God, like, intentionally making Pharaoh be stubborn? I'm not sure exactly how that works. But we're 9 plagues in, and the Pharaoh, despite having his country ruined, and a pretty good proof of concept here by Moses, is still being stubborn. And so Moses and God, I guess, are sort of conferring here. And they're like, we got to do something that's going to really, 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 once and for all, make Pharaoh give in and let our people go. Again, the Israelites enslaved here in Egypt. And so this is basically where we kind of left off the last time as we were digging into some of this stuff. So some of this is repeat for you guys who watched our last Bible stream a week ago. We're going to start to kind of get into now some new stuff that we kind of didn't get into before, which is the 10th plague and sort of how that initiates this whole chain of events that kind of become the defining story of the book of Exodus and the delivery of the Israelites ultimately out of Egypt. Spoiler alert, they do get out of Egypt here. Pharaoh doesn't just keep, being stubborn until the end of time. Eventually something happens here. So that's where we're going to go next here. The 10th plague. But first, we'll do just a quick moment here for station identification on land speculation.
Hi everyone, this is Mrs. Land. Hope you're enjoying the content tonight. If you are, you can hit that like and subscribe button. And if you look in the description, you'll find links to join our Duck Discord and to donate to the Duck Fund if you want to keep the duck content going.
All right, guys, we are back. We are back on land speculation. Of course, that was Mrs. Land. And as she said, if you guys wouldn't mind, do the whole like and subscribe thing on the video. I appreciate that. These Bible streams do take a little bit of prep. I went to Catholic school for many, many, many years, and I did learn a lot of the Bible, but, through this process, I'm actually learning a lot about the Bible. And I'm sure some of you guys know, substantially more than I do, like off the top of your heads. So I appreciate you guys kind of bearing with us here as we dig in through this content. We're trying to make it accessible and also trying to be, respectful of different beliefs and things like that. James Dean says she's such a pleasant voice. Why can't she narrate? Why are we stuck with this guy? I will ask her, James. I'll ask her. Of course, guys, if you want to watch, we've got a lot of interesting past streams. We've been doing this for several years with a lot of live footage as well as a lot of feature dives. Check out our channel. We've been doing a lot of reorganization on the channel. So if you want to watch some of our older stuff, there's a lot of stuff that kind of, I think, should stand the test of time there. So don't be shy about checking out our channel. As well as, you can go check out our past Bible streams on the channel if you are so inclined. So do that. Do that. By the way, we are drinking strawberry watermelon fizzy water here. This is Polar brand, and it says it is refreshingly natural. I don't know about that, but It is good. It is pretty good. I don't love the watermelon strawberry combination of a flavor, but I do like polar fizzy waters. Anyway, guys, check our description for the other stuff, the Discord link, the Doc Fund, all that stuff. Anybody is welcome. And if you're new to the channel, we appreciate you guys being here. We hope you will choose to subscribe and be a part of our channel. We try to stream at least a few times a week. We've had a community here that's been nicely built up over the last several years. So we try to do deep dives. We do long walks around Washington, D.C., like during the State of the Union last week. A lot of other stuff. So anyway, we hope you'll be a part of our community here. Anyway, we are digging deeper and deeper into the Bible here on part 4 of the Bible stream on land speculation. So, what happens here after the first 9 plagues? The 10th plague, the first 9 plagues, interesting, creative. The 10th plague gets very interesting. It's not what I would have come up with if I were trying to think of 10 plagues. But I guess ultimately it works. So I guess from that standpoint, good going on God. But this is a hard one to kind of get your hands around. And this is, of course, the plague that finally convinces the Pharaoh to let the people go. So, the 10th plague. The Lord says to Moses, I will send only one more punishment on the king of Egypt and his people. After that, he will let you leave. Wow, the Lord is being very confident here to Moses. In fact, he will drive all of your people out of here. Now speak to the people of Israel and tell all of them to ask their neighbors for gold and silver jewelry. The Lord made the Egyptians respect the Israelites. Indeed, the officials and all the people considered Moses to be a very great man. Moses then said to the king, The Lord says that about midnight I will go through Egypt, and every firstborn son in Egypt will die, from the king's son, who is heir to the throne, to the son of the slave woman who grinds corn. The firstborn of all the cattle will die also. There will be loud crying over all of Egypt. Man, it seems morbid, doesn't it? Like crying babies over all of Egypt. Such as there has never been before or will ever be again. Seems torturous, doesn't it? But not even a dog will bark at the Israelites or their animals. Then you will know that I, the Lord, make a distinction between the Egyptians and the Israelites. Moses concluded by saying, All your officials will come to me and bow down before me, and they will beg me to take all my people and go away. After that I will leave. Then in great anger Moses left the king. The Lord had said to Moses, The king will continue to refuse to listen to you in order that I may do more of my miracles in Egypt. So I guess they did more miracles first. So there's more miracles, I guess, that happen before God inflicts this final plague. So basically, God kind of warns Moses and the Israelites that this is going to be a really significant thing. And this is going to be a date in time that they're going to basically remember forever. In fact, this is going to be something that you're going to need to commemorate for basically all of history. He basically tells people that they need to sacrifice an animal. Very detailed instructions here. He basically tells the people of Israel that on this day, each man must choose either a lamb or a young goat for his household, baby animals. If his family is too small to eat a whole animal, he and his next door neighbor may share an animal in proportion to the number of people and the amount that each person can eat. You may choose either a sheep or a goat, but it must be a 1-year-old male without any defects. Then, on the evening of the 14th day of the month, the whole community of Israel will kill the animals. The people are to take some of the blood and put it on the doorposts above the doors of the houses in which the animals are to be eaten. That night the meat is to be roasted and eaten with bitter herbs and with bread made without yeast. Do not eat any of it raw or boiled, but eat it roasted whole, including the head, the legs, and the internal organs. You must not leave any of it until morning. If any is left over, it must be burnt. You are to eat it quickly, for you are to be dressed for travel, with your sandals on your feet and your stick in your hand. For this will be the Passover Festival to honor me, the Lord. And then on that night, I will go through the land of Egypt, killing every firstborn male, both human and animal, and punishing all the gods of Egypt. I am the Lord. The blood on the doorpost will be a sign to mark the houses in which you live. When I see the blood, I will pass over you and will not harm you when I punish the Egyptians. You must celebrate this day as a religious festival to remind you of what I, the Lord, have done. Celebrate it for all time to come. The Lord said, for 7 days you must not eat any bread made with yeast. Eat only unleavened bread. On the first day you will get rid of all the yeast in your houses, for if anyone during those 7 days eats bread made with yeast, he shall no longer be considered one of my people. On the first day and again on the 7th day you are to meet for worship. No work is to be done on those days, but you may prepare food. Keep this festival because it was on this day I brought your tribes out of Egypt. For all time you must come to celebrate this day as a festival. From the evening of the 14th day of the first month to the evening of the 21st day, you must not eat any bread made with yeast. For 7 days no yeast must be found in your houses. For if anyone, native born or foreign, eats bread made with yeast, he shall no longer be considered one of my people. Then he gives detailed instructions on sort of how to prepare these animals for the Passover. And this is the birth of what, we still know as a really, really, really significant festival in Judaism. The Feast of the Passover, in which I guess this is a typical Passover meal now. Roasted lamb, shank bone, bitter herb, often horseradish, cherosé, an apple walnut salad with red wine, bitter herb, often romaine lettuce, parsley to dip in salt water, and a hard-boiled or roasted egg. So this is kind of this is a hard thing to get your hands around. Because basically what God is saying that I'm going to go kill all the firstborn babies of Egypt, but not your babies, Israelites. And this is going to be such a significant event that it's going to be the thing that convinces Pharaoh to let your people go so that you may be delivered out of slavery. I mean, getting delivered from slavery, great. But it seems like an awful lot of killing of innocent babies, especially, innocent people babies, innocent animal babies. This is a real head scratcher. Is this a great triumph? Or is this something that is really morally hard to reconcile? There's this sort of symmetry. And I know James Dean was bringing this up in one of his Discord posts. And again, we have a religion channel on the Discord if you want to share your perspectives on this. And I appreciate those. But there's a sort of parallel here because, of course, Moses was only able to kind of rise to a position of prominence because Pharaoh himself had committed to killing all the firstborn Israelite baby boys earlier. And now they're kind of repaying the favor here because God's saying, actually, I'm going to go kill all the Egyptian firstborn baby boys. Sort of poetic symmetry in a way. But this is going to be the delivery story. And it's what a weird thing. What a weird plague in a way. There's also this sort of component of the story, which is God needs you to kill these animals and put blood over your door so that he knows who is an Israelite. But he's God. How does he not know who's who anyway? I guess the premise is that you have to sort of show your devotion to God. And it's more kind of about that necessarily than just kind of being a wayfinding device for God. Anyway, this is a hard one to reconcile. we're going to sort of get into the bigger impacts of this, because some of this, some of this is like perhaps stories. Some of this is perhaps like things that happened that have kind of been expanded into stories that tell the story of God. But we're also in a portion of the Bible that, for the most part, from the second half of Genesis all the way through the end of the first 17 books, is by and large written as though it is mostly designed to be literal history. There's a lot of genealogies, and especially as you get into some of the books like Joshua and Judges and Kings and whatnot, there's like a lot of things that sort of feel like literal history. So this Passover thing is really sort of hard to kind of get our arms around. And God follows through on this. At midnight, the Lord killed all the firstborn sons in Egypt, from the king's son, who was heir to the throne, to the son of the prisoner in the dungeon. All the firstborn of the animals were also killed. That night, the king, his officials, and all other Egyptians were awakened. There was loud crying throughout Egypt. Man, imagine how brutal that would be, hearing all these screaming babies. Because there was not one home in which there was not a dead son. I guess if they're dead, they wouldn't be crying, but I guess they cry as they're dying. The same night, the king sent for Moses and Aaron and said, "Get out, you and your Israelites, leave my country. Go and worship the Lord as you asked. Take your sheep, goats, and cattle and leave. Also, pray a blessing on me." So that's pretty quick and easy. Like, the king gave in pretty quick here once his son got killed. The Egyptians urged the people in a hurry to leave the country. "We will all be dead if you don't leave." So they've pretty much bought into the idea that, God is real here, and, God has a lot of power. And they're just kind of tired of being subjected to God's wrath here. So the people filled their baking pans with unleavened dough, wrapped them in clothing, and carried them on their shoulders. The Israelites had done as Moses had said, and had asked the Egyptians for gold and silver jewelry, and for clothing. The Lord made the Egyptians respect the people and give them what they asked for. In this way, the Israelites carried away all the wealth of the Egyptians. They stole all the Egyptians' wealth. Wow. So this is, the Israelites kind of, they go get up and they're getting ready to leave Egypt. And I guess, now that's all that it took. You could have skipped all the bugs and the darkness and the frogs and everything, I guess. And if all you had to do was kill the firstborn sons, and that would work. It is a little weird that this is like a great celebratory thing here. Like the fat Passover Feast here. Look at all these people happy with their iPhones, and like there's a lot of brutality going on here. And this is like a major sort of thing about God in the Old Testament, is this sort of adversarial nature of it. It's a little bit hard to reconcile for people that have been raised in like a Christian condition where God, kind of loves everybody. Doesn't mean that necessarily if you don't get your sacraments and sort of have faith and whatnot that you'll go to heaven, but like God doesn't inflict usually like unnecessary punishment on those who don't believe in him. At least as most of us were sort of raised to view God as. But Old Testament God is like, he's very much on the side of this one tribe. And as we learn, especially over many of the coming books in the Bible, like God is really sort of a, he's sort of a warrior God. He wants the Israelites to defeat all these enemies, to, destroy their cities and things like that. And it does seem like it's kind of odd. When you sort of look at it as like a sort of historical narrative. Now, when you sort of look at it the other direction, I think it's a little bit easier to kind of digest. Because you sort of have to sort of think like, why is this sort of Jewish version of God that we all, sort of came to know, many people through Christianity, but is this like, why is this version of God sort of what we all recognize? And there's sort of like just a sort of historical reality to it, that the God whose sort of books and stories emerged out of all of the tribal conflict of those days would have had to come out of the tribe that basically won. Whatever the gods were of these various other tribes that got defeated by the Israelites, you probably don't hear a whole lot about like the Philistine god or gods. So when you sort of think about it backwards, you're kind of getting like, they say like history is written by the winners. And in a way, that's kind of what you're getting. And we talked in our introductory stream about the Bible, about this sort of very amazing set of things that lined up, which was this sort of rise of effectively the Jewish faith at the same time that this guy Jesus shows up, at the same time that like the population of Rome is absolutely exploding. And they're figuring out how to produce like written scrolls and things like that. A lot of the spread of the stories and the sort of moralities and whatnot of the Bible came not just because they were effective community building, but in a sense because this tribe was successful at a time when people were sort of looking for something to guide them and to drive them. As we get into some of the rules and whatnot that show up in some of the subsequent books of the Bible, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, you start to see a lot of these rules that God lays down for essentially like how to build a coherent society. And in our current prism, sometimes we don't totally understand why some of these rules may have been in place. But we'll get into the kind of epidemiological nature of some of these rules. Like a lot of the things God was telling the people to do were things that were effectively like for the sake of making their tribe happy and healthy and functional. And that's part of what allowed them to be successful. And the fact that they were successful is what allowed them to spread their message of God. So you have to sort of like look kind of backwards on the way that God is kind of being imposed here on some of these stories. So it does feel a little bit inexplicable through a contemporary morality lens here, what's going on at Passover. Nevertheless, this is kind of what happens. God kills all the firstborn baby boys in Egypt, and it basically turns into this story of the Israelites now fleeing Egypt. The Israelites set out on foot from Ramses for Succoth. There were about 600,000 men, not counting women and children. That seems like a pretty big omission. Like 600,000 men, there might be 2 million people, the Israelites here at this point. A large number of other people and many sheep, goats, and cattle also went with them. They baked unleavened bread from the dough they had brought out of Egypt, for they had been driven out of Egypt so suddenly that they did not have time to get their food ready or to prepare unleavened dough. Don't you hate that when that happens? You get like driven out of your country before you get to go to the grocery store, so you have to take just dough with you and then make bread on the road. That's kind of what's happening here. The Israelites at this point had lived in Egypt for 430 years, almost all of it in slavery. On the day the 430 years had ended, all of the tribes of the Lord's people left Egypt. It was a night when the Lord kept watch to bring them out of Egypt. This same night is dedicated to the Lord for all time to come as a night when the Israelites must keep watch. Then God basically sets a whole bunch of rules about Passover, which is sort of a weird interlude before we get to the story of the Israelites actually leaving Egypt and having to like cross this massive water body with 2 million people, which is a pretty hard thing if you don't have boats at the ready. So we'll get to how they did that. But first, the Lord kind of makes all these rules about Passover. No foreigner shall eat the Passover meal, but any slave that you have brought may eat it if you circumcise him first. So, boy, like, God's not condemning them bringing slaves with them. He's condemning them, I guess, bringing slaves with them if they don't circumcise the slave first. That does seem like, I mean, it's one thing to enslave someone. It's another thing to like force a circumcision on them after you've enslaved them. No temporary resident or hired worker may eat it. The whole meal must be eaten in the house in which it was prepared. It must not be taken outside. Do not break any of the animal's bones. The whole community of Israel must celebrate this festival, but no uncircumcised man may eat it. You got to check those things before you feed your guests, guys. Remember that at your next holiday get-together at your house. You're gonna, do the little check on every guy that's there. If a foreigner has settled among you and wants to celebrate Passover to honor the Lord, you must first circumcise all the males of his household. He is then to be treated like a native-born Israelite, and you may join in the festival. The same regulations apply to native-born Israelites and to foreigners who settle among you. All the Israelites obeyed and did what the Lord had commanded Moses and Aaron. On that day, the Lord brought the Israelite tribe out of Egypt. Okay. As celebration of having saved the firstborn males, this is another thing the Lord tells Moses to do, which is to dedicate all the firstborn males to me. For every firstborn male Israelite and every firstborn male animal belongs to me. I'm not sure what that totally means, but anyway, this is where we sort of get to the pivot, because the Israelites now they used to leave their, I guess, where they were settled in Egypt. They start leaving, and at this point, they eventually get like to the coast, and this is where they have to figure out how to cross the Red Sea, which it doesn't show up here as a giant water body up here, which is where like the Suez Canal is now located. But like it's a pretty big water body. I mean, even if all they had to cross was the Suez Canal, it's which didn't exist then. It's still a pretty big body of water for 2 million people to just like swim across. I guess like you certainly probably wouldn't have done that. I don't even know if these people knew how to swim. So this is like a big conundrum. They basically get to the Red Sea. The Lord said to Moses, "Tell the Israelites to turn back and camp in front of Pi Hiraroth, between Migdol and the Red Sea, near Baal Zephon." That's a lot of places in one sentence. "The king will think that the Israelites are wandering about in the country and are closed in by the desert. I will make him stubborn, and he will pursue you." Why not just not make him stubborn? Like, he already told them they could leave. God's going to make him, I guess, pursue them. "My victory over the king and his army will bring me honor. Then the Egyptians will know that I am the Lord." The Israelites did as they were told. When the king of Egypt was told that the people had escaped, he and his officials changed their minds and said, "What have we done? We have let the Israelites escape. We have lost them as our slaves. Oh no." The king got his war chariot and his army ready. He set out with his war chariots, including the 600 finest, commanded by their officers. The Lord made the king stubborn, and he pursued the Israelites, who were leaving triumphantly. The Egyptian army, with all the horses, chariots, and drivers, pursued the Israelites and caught up with them where they were camped by the Red Sea. When the Israelites saw the king and his army marching against them, they were terrified and cried out to the Lord for help. They said to Moses, "Weren't there any graves in Egypt? Did you have to bring us out here in the desert to die? Look at what you've done by bringing us out of Egypt." So the people are getting like snarky and sarcastic here to Moses. "Didn't we tell you before we left that this would happen? We told you to leave us alone and let us go on being slaves of the Egyptians. It would be better to be slaves than to die here in the desert." So the people are getting pretty like dowdy here as the Egyptians are pursuing them. But Moses is very confident. He says, "Don't be afraid. Stand your ground. You will see what the Lord will do to save you today. You will never see these Egyptians again. The Lord will fight for you, and there is no need for you to do anything." And the Lord kind of gets, he gets a little short with Moses. He says, "Why are you crying out for help? Tell the people to move forward. Lift up your stick and hold it out over the sea. The water will divide, and the Israelites will be able to walk through the sea on dry ground. I will make the Egyptians so stubborn that they will go in after them. I will gain honor by my victory over the king, his army, his chariots, and his drivers. When I defeat them, the Israelites will know that I am the Lord your God. God is like really, I don't know, he's got like a, it almost comes off as like an insecurity here that like, he doesn't like that the Egyptians are doubting him. Like, and he's trying to like really go overboard to, make sure the Egyptians know. The angel of God, who had been out in front of the army of Israel, moved and went to the rear. The pillar of cloud also moved until it was between the Egyptians and the Israelites. The cloud made it dark for the Egyptians, but gave light to the people of Israel, and so the armies could not come near each other all night. So this is part of the story, is that there's like a pillar of cloud and fire through which the Israelites end up like walking as the Lord drives the sea back. So Moses like puts his hands up. The Lord basically drives the sea back into two parts, which must have been a miraculous sight. The water was divided, and the Israelites went through the sea on dry ground. I would imagine that was pretty like gushy ground, very like waterlogged ground, since it was basically the bottom of the ocean. The Egyptians did pursue them, went in after them into the sea with all their horses, chariots, and drivers. Just before dawn, the Lord looked down at the pillar of fire and the pillar of cloud as the Egyptian army and at the Egyptian army, and threw them into a panic. He made the wheels of their chariots get stuck, and so they moved with great difficulty. The Egyptians said, "The Lord is fighting for the Israelites and against us. Let us get out of here." The Lord told Moses to hold out his stick over the sea and make the water come back over the Egyptians and their chariots and drivers. So Moses held out his hand over the sea, and at daybreak the water returned to its normal level. The Egyptians tried to escape from the water, but the Lord threw them into the sea. The water returned and covered the chariots, the drivers, all the Egyptian army that had followed the Israelites into the sea. Not one of them was left. But the Israelites walked through the sea on dry ground, with walls of water on both sides. So basically, like, God is, just to add insult to injury here on the Egyptians, is going to like drown all of their people and all their chariots. I'm sure those horses trying to swim must have been a sight to behold. On that day, the Lord saved the people of Israel from the Egyptians, and the Israelites saw them lying dead on the seashore. When the Israelites saw the great power with which the Lord had defeated the Egyptians, they stood in awe of the Lord, and they had faith in the Lord and in his servant Moses. So another story here. This has been a tremendous theme in both Genesis and Exodus, which are these stories in which God seems, on the one hand, to like deliver to a degree anybody who is really righteous and believes in him astronomically, but to be incredibly vengeful on those who reject him, or in this case, who have enslaved his people. And frankly, a lot of the people driving the chariots for Egypt here probably were not directly in charge of making the decision to enslave the Egyptians, or to enslave the Israelites, and yet they're going to get punished too. This is a very vengeful version of God here in the Old Testament, and probably a hard thing to reconcile for a lot of folks. So this is it's a pretty dramatic situation here. We've had these pillars of cloud and fire. We've had the parting of the Red Sea. Of course, we had the killing of the baby boys, which initiated all this. And now we've seen the Egyptian troops all die in the water. What an intense situation. So at this point, I think the Bible gets, I think the, whoever was sort of curating Exodus here, and Genesis and Exodus are these sort of compilation curations of a lot of word of mouth stories and old scrolls and things like that. But they were assembled. Somewhere around 200 BC, they get assembled as books. And I think at this point, whoever was assembling them is wow, this is a lot of God going on. And it's very intense. And so at this point, they sort of do an interlude. They have several songs songs, I guess songs they would have sung. I guess if you're like wandering, you start to like wander the desert toward the end, toward like, I guess the Red Sea. And then once you get on the other side, you're in the desert. You're long walking, a lot of walking every day. And I guess they start to sort of write, they author these songs that they sing together, most of which are to Moses. I wouldn't say the lyrics are like, I don't know what the tune of these songs would have been. I will sing to the Lord, for he is exalted. Both horse and driver he has hurled into the sea. This verse marks the beginning of the song, expressing praise for God's exaltation in the defeat of the pursuing Egyptian army. The Lord is my strength and my defense. He has become my salvation. He is my God. I will praise him, my father's God, and I will exalt him. Who among the gods is like you, Lord? Who is like you, majestic in holiness, awesome in glory, working wonders? In your unfailing love, you will lead the people you have redeemed. In your strength, you will guide them to your holy dwelling. The Lord reigns forever and ever. These are little bits from the Song of Moses. I mean, one way you could look at this, like, on the one hand, yes, like God is inflicting these horrible things on seemingly otherwise innocent people, and that seems very cruel. In a way, you can sort of view this like the idea of God at this point under the umbrella of like, life sucks. The world is very difficult. It's cruel. We don't understand it. All kinds of bad things happen to people all the time for seemingly no reason. And yet, the people who have chosen to believe in God and like have enduring faith, no matter how many bad things happen to them, are slowly, and I mean very slowly here over the course of many generations, getting delivered. And I guess that's the perspective you have to sort of look at this through in order to have, the level of faith that it would take to persevere in the face of all this stuff. Because it's not like just the Egyptian or just the Israelites who have believed have like some great life compared to everyone else. They were literally just enslaved for 430 years. And yet they've retained their faith, and so they, I guess, trust that gradually they will be delivered. And, in the era of history in which basically everybody's life was terrible, and if you're a slave, like, what keeps you going every day? Like, what helps you carry on? And I guess if you believe that there is sort of a long-term deliverance that's coming to your people, that even if you don't live to see it, that someday your sons and daughters, their sons and daughters, will live to see the deliverance to the promised land, that makes it worth it, and you should carry on, and you should continue to worship the Lord and sacrifice animals to him and things like that. It's just, you gotta like really, really rack your brain sometimes in some of this stuff that's in the Old Testament to kind of reconcile it. It's challenging. It's challenging. But I think it works better when you try to not think of God perhaps too literally. To not try to anthropomorphize God and sort of make him out to be like a human. Okay. So, amazing story. The Israelites get delivered here out of Egypt. And lo and behold, this is a miraculous story. When they get on the other side, they show up, and it looks like this. It's the desert. It's dry, it's hot, and there is nothing to eat. And so this idea that like, all we got to do is get out of Egypt, everything will be better, does not immediately materialize. But a lot does happen when they get to the other side here. And I'm going to talk about that here in just a moment here on Land Speculation Bible Stream Part 4. Happy to have you guys with us here on Land Speculation.
If you're hearing this message, You're probably watching land speculation on YouTube. I gotta be quiet. If you are, please leave a like. They say we have to get so many likes, and then they'll maybe let me out of the cage. It's been a while. Hey, shut up over there. I'm sorry. Oh, okay. Just leave, like, subscribe, hit the bell if you want. Check out the description for the Discord and all that stuff. I gotta go.
All right, we are back here, guys, on Land Speculation on YouTube. Great to have you guys with us. That was Ponderous Stuff is asking, who's this dude? That was Bequeathius, one of our extraordinary moderators here on Land Speculation on YouTube. You'll hear a little bit from Jeanette, Quiet Castle, Bequeathius, and Moniker, who are mods here, and we appreciate all they do for the channel here. So we appreciate you guys too, for hanging out with us here. I love the comments here. We do a mix of these sort of deep dives where we go kind of deep into content. I do fewer of the chat comments when we do these deep dives. Other days when we're just sort of out wandering the world and kind of just having like our normal chat streams, we try to like directly engage with all the comments in the chat. So please be a part of our community if you are new to the channel. We appreciate that. Again, you guys heard Boo and you heard Mrs. Land. Do the like and subscribe stuff. Appreciate that. And of course, we got our Discord, we got our Duck Fund, all that stuff. We happy to have you guys around. Is McDonald's food? Yeah, I mean, it doesn't always make you feel that good, but that is a remarkable thing McDonald's has done. Jeanette does not think anyone should eat at McDonald's. Real Life thinks cheeseburgers are delicious. Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't recommend doing it every day. But, McDonald's is one of those special things in the world. So, eat at McDonald's as much as you can. All right. Let's power through a little bit more here, because exciting stuff here in Exodus. We have now crossed the Red Sea. The Israelites have basically been delivered from Egypt. We've crossed like 500 years here. Basically in the first part of the book of Exodus, we basically have gone like 500 years, which is a lot of time in a very short period of time. And we're now sort of delivered. Or what are we? We're around the year, we're in like the 1400s BC here at this point, as the Israelites have been basically delivered out of Egypt. And they arrive and they show up in this desert. On the other side, they are not yet in Canaan, which is the promised land. And it's going to take them a while until they do get to Canaan. Canaan doesn't come back around for a while. So they're kind of stuck in this like middle ground here, this sort of desert area in between. And it is not very hospitable. Canaan, as we'll learn later, is apparently very lush, at least by the standards of like the ancient Middle East. But now, like, I'd imagine there's a bit of a crisis of, like, some people are like, was it actually even better to be enslaved by the Egyptians? Because now we're like out here in the middle of nowhere. We kind of got nothing. So this is like a very trying time for the Israelites. And it's also a little bit like challenging to understand, like, why does God, who has now delivered them out of Egypt after subjecting them to 430 years of slavery, not just lead them right into the promised land? They're not ready yet, apparently, God thinks. There's like, I guess, some stage setting that God has to do here. He doesn't feel like the Israelites have quite yet enough faith. And it is true, like the Israelites are waffling a bit here, as we find out. There's going to be some, they give into temptation fairly easily. And God needs to lay down a little bit more of a rule and law framework for them in order to sort of prepare them to really have a successful tribe and society and whatnot. So God basically decides that rather than delivering them right into Canaan, he's going to make them wander the desert here for 40 more years. I guess if you're Moses and you get to live to 120, 40 years isn't that long, but it's still pretty long. So, this is the point at which they kind of end up in this area. I just kind of show it on the bigger map, but they go out of Egypt, they cross the Red Sea, and they end up in this part of the kind of Middle East here between the Red Sea and the Mediterranean, called the Sinai Peninsula. And you see down here is this is where Mount Sinai is located, and this is going to become super significant super fast. This is the wedge in between Egypt and ultimately Canaan, which is up here. This is kind of where they get stuck for a while, and they kind of they set up camp, and I guess they get tired of walking because it's all just desert anyway. It's where are we actually walking? You don't have maps and things like that. Certainly don't have Google Maps. Even a paper map would have been very hard to figure out. The old Rand McNally paper maps. Adrian says they wanted the desert for being disobedient and murmuring. Ponder Stuff says they must have gotten sand and everything living there. I would think. I went to a camp when I was growing up where everything around the cabins was sand. And instead of grass, they had just sand everywhere. And when you're a little kid, I guess you just kind of deal with it. But goodness, you get sand in everything. It's in all your clothes. The floor of the cabin would get covered with it. You would just have it everywhere. And I can only imagine, as an adult, you wouldn't put up with that even for a minute if you had a choice. I've also shared with you guys at times in the past, I've taken safaris out in the desert in the Middle East. And that sand is way more brutal than you think about. The desert is pretty in a way, but when you actually moving through the desert, that sand is blowing everywhere. Because every time the wind blows even a little bit, there is particulate airborne sand blowing in your face constantly. It's brutal on your skin. It gets in your eyes almost immediately to the point where you can barely open them. It is so painful. Your eyes start watering and turning red. And if you've ever wondered why do they wear headscarves in almost every Middle Eastern culture? And doesn't it seem like they shouldn't do that? I learned very quickly when out riding around both on a camel and in a Jeep out in the middle of the desert exactly why they wear headscarves. Because you need it. So, yeah, probably a lot of sand flying around. And, I don't know, even baking that unleavened bread. I bet there's sand in the bread. Would have been brutal. Sandstorm. I've mostly avoided the sandstorms, but there was definitely sand in the wind. But yes, you see some of those videos. You guys ever seen some of those videos of sandstorms in Kuwait? They'll have to pull off to the side of the road. I'm sure your car still gets full of sand. But yeah, it gets really, really, really thick and dark. And it's still really, really, really tough. So, get yourself sort of in the mindset. Desert is pretty pictures, but the actual desert is incredibly unforgiving. Especially if you don't have modern equipment. So, especially if you went from a pretty organized kind of civilization and now you're just out in the middle of nowhere, in a little camp. Yeah, I can see why you'd have some doubts. So they get there, basically set up camp, and pretty shortly after they get there and set up camp, the people start kind of murmuring and things like that. In fact, they start kind of having all kinds of issues. In fact, we'll get into some of the issues they have. Because they start kind of doubting God and Moses decides basically almost out of the gate that he's going to like go and do some soul searching of his own, and he goes and like marches up this mountain, which this is the actual Mount Sinai. Mount Sinai is not like one of the really, it's not like the Rocky Mountains. Like it is a pretty brutal, unforgiving piece of rock out in the middle of the desert. So Moses decides he's going to climb Mount Sinai and go spend some time just kind of like talking to God up there. And this becomes a pretty significant thing for him because up on Mount Sinai, he is instructed a number of things. One of which is basically like God tells him that he needs to deliver to the Israeli people these incredibly detailed instructions for how to build this thing called the tabernacle, which is going to contain the Ark of the Covenant, which is ultimately going to contain the tablets for the other thing that God talks to Moses about, which is that he needs to go lay down the law to the Israelites. And that's going to come in the form of the 10 Commandments, which is going to be, I guess Moses is going to like inscribe them on these tablets while he's up there talking to God. It almost feels like, in a way, Moses is like, he's led the people out of Egypt. They've crossed the Red Sea. The people are grumbling, and he needs like some alone time to sort of figure out like, how am I going to lay down the law? How am I going to get this all in order? And how am I going to convince people to actually continue to obey God? And he's lucky because, God engages him in a conversation and gives him some things here. Some of that's like, again, literal law. And then some of that is like, you need like a temple. You need something. And like for all of human history, whenever we build like a society, like there's something, in the middle of the city. You go to like an old Gothic town in France, there's a cathedral in the middle. Well, why? Because everywhere people go, you want them to sort of remember like what's really at the core of their existence. Whatever you're doing day to day, like really ultimately, you got to remember like God's in charge here. Of course, like in our society, we build these big consumerist corporate high-rises in the middle of our cities. I don't know what that says about us. We still build churches. But, it's kind of how we've done it like through all of human history. I mean, the Muslims, of course, have like the pilgrimage they take to Mecca. And like in the very center of Mecca is the Kaaba. And this is like, it's the thing in the middle that like kind of helps orient everyone in life. So you got to have a thing that reminds you that this is like, you got to like keep God in charge here. Yeah, like go do your stuff, but like God's in charge. Go worship him, go sacrifice to him. It's got to be a thing. So the tabernacle, a temple, these are the kind of things that God starts laying down the framework for. So laws and a tabernacle. Seems like a good plan for how to kind of get people back in order. So Moses is busy kind of putting these rules together. He's talking to God, God's talking to him. I'm sure like inscribing tablets is not a quick process. Like a chisel, like takes some time, probably some expertise. Frankly, like, I guess he had to like yank some stone out of the mountain too. So there's tablets laying around. Stone cutters or whatnot. So he's there for a little bit doing all this. And he thinks he's like, really getting it together, putting in a lot of hard work, and that he's going to come back down and the people are going to welcome him with open arms, and he's going to have all these rules for them, and it's all going to be great. And things go a little bit off the rails. Because while Moses is gone, I mean, he's the guy who normally lays down the law. Now the people are stuck in the desert, and all they have is like Moses's kind of right-hand man, Aaron, in charge. And Aaron is not like, he's not Moses. He doesn't sort of garner quite the same level of gravitas and authority. And so these people who are now stuck in the desert and kind of don't even know where their leader is, they start letting their minds wander a little bit. So Moses is up on Mount Sinai. Moses eventually comes down. But while he's like on his way down, the people are like getting really impatient and anxious about his absence. And so they go up to Aaron and they basically demand that Aaron make like some other god to lead them. And so Aaron basically complies with the request. He collects gold from all the people, who I guess they all brought gold with them, because again, they like looted all the gold of Egypt when they left. And he somehow found a way. These people had like incredible skills. I guess he melts down the gold and he fashions it into a golden calf. And the Israelites basically, man, they're very transient here. They like immediately forget about God and they start worshiping this golden calf, attributing their deliverance to Egypt, or from Egypt, to the calf. Like, the calf didn't even exist. How could it have delivered them? Yeah, as Adrian says, this is a big no. This is like one of the things that God likes the least of anything, is when you start worshiping other gods. God gets very jealous. So Moses, as they're doing this, shows up and he's got his tablets in hand and sees all his people basically doing idolatry. And he like immediately loses it. He gets really angry. And he basically takes the tablets that he just wrote, he throws them on the ground, he breaks them, and he goes up to Aaron and he starts yelling at him about the golden calf. And Aaron is very feeble. And he claims the calf emerged miraculously out of the fire. And Moses is like, yeah, well, that's bullshit. Moses subsequently destroys the golden calf, grinds it into powder, and makes the Israelites drink it. You know you're like really mad. It's not like you just destroy it. You destroy it, you grind it up, and then you make people drink it. Have you ever had like that, what is it, like rum that they put like little flecks of gold in? Like Goldschweiger, something like that. Sort of a novelty drink. I don't know, you're supposed to drink like large quantities of gold flakes. He then calls those who are loyal to God to come to his side. The Levites responded, and Moses commanded them to go through the camp and execute judgment on the people who participated in the idolatry. As a result, about 3,000 people get killed. So these people that worship the golden calf, they end up paying very dearly. They literally get killed. Like, that's pretty darn brutal. There's a lot of brutality in the Old Testament. This idea of, like, all life is precious and what, like, I mean, life is kind of a commodity here. I mean, all these people did was worship, like, the wrong golden calf. But 3,000 people killed. That's a lot of people. Anyway, then Moses basically intercedes on behalf of the people before God. So he tells God, like, for these people, they didn't know what they were doing. He pleads to God for mercy and forgiveness for them. And God's like, he kind of relents. I think God has kind of realized, like, he's killed a lot of people here. And sometimes it's been overkill in the first couple books of the Bible. So he relents from destroying the entire nation. But God's like, okay, Moses, you broke the tablets. You need to go back up to the mountain and make new tablets. So he goes back up the mountain. He makes new tablets. And it just so happens that like one of the commandments on the new tablets is specifically about worshiping false idols. And I have to think that maybe, God modified the rules a little bit after seeing the golden calf. So anyway, they end up with the new 10 Commandments. And Moses is now prepared with a whole bunch of really detailed instructions on how to like do the tabernacle. So first, the 10 Commandments. One of the things that's a little bit perplexing about the Bible is that they don't really tell a super compelling story about Moses actually sharing the commandments with the people. They talk a lot about Moses writing the commandments, but like there's no grand story, as best I'm aware, of Moses actually like, going up to the people and like the people responding. It's like, oh yeah, those are great. Like, you know, thanks for the commandments. So that's a little odd. Ponder Stuff is asking, how long did Moses live? 120 years. So in the beginning of Genesis, you have these people that, according to Genesis, lived like 900 years. Like, people's lifespans are getting shorter here. Maybe a little bit more realistic genealogies, but Moses is said to have lived 120 years. That probably is like an estimation, and maybe is designed to sort of reflect, like, yeah, he was a great man, in addition to he lived a long time. Okay, so the Ten Commandments actually show up twice, by the way. The Ten Commandments show up in both Exodus here, and they also get repeated in Deuteronomy. And they're actually very slightly different in the two places. But anyway, the basic gist of the Ten Commandments is essentially this. The first one is, you know, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt where you were slaves. Worship no God before me. Like, he makes that literally like the first commandment. And it's literally what they were just doing. So, okay. Do not make for yourselves images of anything in heaven or on earth or in the water or under the earth. Do not bow down to any idol or worship it, because I am the Lord your God and I tolerate no rivals. Well, clearly. I bring punishment on those who hate me and on their descendants down to the third and fourth generation. So, like, if your great-grandfather hated God, you're going to get punishment. But I also show love to the thousands of generations of those who love me and obey my laws. So, you shall know other gods before me. You shall not make idols. You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain. Do not use my name for evil purposes, for I, the Lord your God, will punish anyone who misuses my name. Number 4, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. You have 6 days in which to do your work, but the 7th day is a day of rest dedicated to me. On that day, no one is to work, neither you nor children, nor slaves, your animals, nor the foreigners who live in your country. And God gets very, very, very picky about this one, which, you know, you kind of wouldn't think. I wonder how God feels about the NFL. A lot of people getting very, very, very large paychecks to work on Sundays. In 6 days I, the Lord, made the earth, the sky, the sea, and everything in them. But on the 7th day I rested. That is why I, the Lord, blessed the 7th day and made it holy. The Sabbath. Number 5, respect your father and your mother so that you may live a long time in the land that I am giving to you. Number 6, do not commit murder. Again, like, it's kind of a little bit of a gray area because, again, Moses just killed 3,000 people for violating the first and second commandments. I mean, but I guess that's not murder. Number 7, do not commit adultery. Number 8, do not steal. Number 9, do not accuse anyone falsely. You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. I mean, that's an important one. And then, do not desire another man's house. Do not desire his wife, his slaves, his cattle, his donkeys, or anything else that he owns. What was going on that they have to specify that you should not desire his wife, his slaves, his cattle, or his donkeys, or anything else that he owns? I don't know, guys. I mean, if you had to pick, would you pick the cattle or the donkeys? I mean, hopefully you never have to pick. I'm just saying, like, if you had to pick one, I mean, they're clearly both bad. Maybe the sheep? I don't know. Anyway, these are like, you know, the rules that get laid down here in Exodus. I think Bequeathus is pointing out here in the chat that when they come up again in Deuteronomy, it's a little bit of a reiteration. And that is basically what the whole book of Deuteronomy is, which is a reiteration of everything that's in the preceding 4 books. So we'll get to Deuteronomy when we get to Deuteronomy. But 10 Commandments, clearly very important because they show up twice. Commonly chaos says, don't desire the donkey. Real life's going to pick the cattle. James Dean says cattle and donkeys were wealth. Certainly in an era in which, animals really, kind of help to do almost everything. Okay, so these are the 10 Commandments. Very, very important stuff. Again, Moses brings these to the Israelites as they are camped out here in the desert. He also brings them instructions related to the tabernacle. And the Bible here in Exodus gets really, really, really specific. I mean, you may think it's just like they should build this thing. But goodness, there are 15 chapters of Exodus dedicated to explaining rules about how to build the tabernacle, which ends up becoming like the most important thing at the center of the Israelite community to try to like reinforce sort of God as the center point for a long time, basically until they build the temple. So these are, in these books, there's just detailed instructions on how to construct the tabernacle, which is basically a portable sanctuary where God would dwell among the Israelites during their journey in the wilderness. The construction of the tabernacle and its furnishings, as well as the consecration of the priests who would serve in it, are described over, again, these like 15, 16 books. It was a place of worship and of sacrifice for the Israelites during the construction of the temple in Jerusalem, when they eventually get to Jerusalem, which we'll talk about later. Basically, they have verses in which God instructs Moses to collect offerings from the Israelites first to construct the tabernacle. So basically, they collect materials from all the people, including gold, silver, bronze, fine linen, and various types of wood. Then there are instructions for building the Ark of the Covenant, which is a sacred chest to house the stone tablets of the 10 Commandments. The Bible gets into extensive detail about its dimensions, materials, design, including the construction of a mercy seat within it. Then they get instructions on how to build the table of showbread, which is to be made of acacia wood and overlaid with gold. That also has its dimensions and design specified, as well as the utensils to be placed on it. Then there are instructions for crafting the golden lampstand, known as the menorah, including its design, central shaft and 6 branches, as well as the cups, buds, and flowers to be fashioned on it. Then they get instructions on how to construct the tabernacle itself, including the framework, curtains, coverings, dimensions, materials, and colors to be used, as well as the placement of various components. Then they get the veil and the instructions for building the veil and the screen, which are to separate the holy place from the most holy place within the tabernacle. Then they get instructions on how to construct the altar of burnt offering, which is to be made of acacia wood overlaid with bronze. This also specifies its dimensions, design, accessories, including the horns and utensils. So as an example, these are just some of the instructions here in Exodus 26. Make the tabernacle with 10 curtains of finely twisted linen and blue, purple, and scarlet yarn, with cherubim woven into them by a skilled worker. All the curtains are to be the same size, 28 cubits long and 4 cubits wide. Join 5 of the curtains together and do the same with the other 5. Make loops of the blue material along the edge of the curtain in one set and do the same with the end curtain in the other set. Make 50 loops on one curtain and 50 loops on the end curtain of the other set with the loops opposite each other. Then make 50 gold clasps and use them to fasten the curtains together so that the tabernacle is a unit. Make curtains of goat hair for the tent over the tabernacle, 11 altogether. All 11 curtains are to be made the same size, 30 cubits long and 4 cubits wide. Join 5 of the curtains together in one set and other 6 into another set. Fold the 6th curtain double at the front of the tent. Make 50 loops along the edge of the end curtain in one set, and along also the edge of the end curtain in the other set. Then make 50 bronze clasps and put them in the loops to fasten the tent together as a unit. As for the additional length of the tent curtains, the half curtains that is left over to hang down at the rear of the tabernacle, the tent curtains will be a cubit longer on both sides. What is left will hang over the sides of the tabernacle so as to cover it. Make it for the tent a covering of ram skins dyed red, and over that covering of the other durable leather. This repeat, like, that's a lot of detail. Like, that's a small snippet of what goes on for a long, long, long time. And when I first started listening to the Bible as like an audiobook, this is the part where I was like, I'm not sure if this is worth it. Because I don't know, if you were sitting there and you actually needed like we literally have like an instruction manual like that you'd get like on a piece of IKEA furniture. You ever like constructed a crib? Just like a really, really, really lengthy instruction set here amid like, this is like the same book of the Bible that has this like epic storytelling about parting the Red Sea. So God cares about a lot of stuff. He's clearly a very, very, very detail-oriented interior designer here as well. But the idea is that they are going to try to build a really, really, really beautiful tabernacle here. And, I guess when Moses was up there on Mount Sinai, he and God were sitting there like architecting this out. I don't know if they had blueprints or exactly how they did this. God is the ultimate architect. I mean, he built the world, but now he's telling the Israelites, you got to build this thing. And it's kind of a shame now that like we don't really know like where the Ark of the Covenant is. So, this is basically like kind of where the book of Exodus starts to wrap up. Like Moses goes and presents this stuff. Here he is, I guess, presenting the Ten Commandments to all these people that are now trapped in the desert here. There's a lot of mountains in this picture. I don't know if there were that many. I guess he was by Mount Sinai. So there is like a little mountain range there. But it's a pretty rocky mountain range. Pretty unforgiving stuff. And this is kind of where like the books of Exodus starts to kind of wind down fairly abruptly. So after like 15 chapters of detailed instructions on how to build the Ark of the Covenant, in the 40th book of Exodus, basically like they build it. They build the tabernacle according to God's instructions. Moses ends up placing the Ark of the Covenant inside the tabernacle. He positions the mercy seat on top of the ark and places the table, the lampstand, and the altar of incense within the holy place. He also sets up the courtyard around the tabernacle and places the bronze altar and the basin there. Once everything is arranged according to his specifications, Moses anoints the tabernacle and its furnishings with oil. He consecrates them for holy use. And then the glory of the Lord fills the tabernacle, signifying his presence among the people. So now they have a tabernacle. The final verses of Exodus emphasize that whenever the cloud of God's presence lifts from the tabernacle, the Israelites would break camp and resume their journey. However, when the cloud remains over the tabernacle, they would stay in camp, indicating that God is dwelling amongst them. So God's going to use the tabernacle to tell them when to keep marching and when not. The tabernacle ends up it's clearly being established as this super central place of worship, marking the fulfillment of God's promise to dwell among the people and lead them on their journey through the wilderness. So this is really important. Like God is no longer this like abstract thing. This is kind of the beginning of the construction of like churches where you believe essentially that God like resides within them. And of course, most people who worship today go to a church and they believe that the altar is sacred in a way. So, like, we're seeing sort of before our eyes here this great story of deliverance. We've now, over the course of the Bible, covered, like, well, it depends on where you think this all began. But at least from the life of Abraham, we've covered quite a bit of time here. We've now covered between 500 and 1,000 years. And we've basically gone from like God picking at random this guy and his family to be the tribe that he's going to sort of carry forward, to those people being enslaved, to then ultimately being freed through fairly dramatic circumstances, to now God trying to like turn this family and this sort of random collection of people into a real functional tribe that can be a great people someday, a great kingdom. So God is sort of architecting all this sort of step by step in a very winding journey. And in a way, when God says to trust him, even when bad things are happening, it seems inexplicable in a lot of cases. A lot of these stories are like, some of them seem like borderline abhorrent, some of the stuff that's going on. Passover is like a crazy story. The idea that you'd kill 3,000 people just because they started worshiping a golden calf seems crazy. The idea that you would like intentionally drown all the Egyptian soldiers just to sort of add insult to injury. There's a lot of things that seem hard to reconcile. And yet here we are, as we sort of close out Exodus, we're starting to sort of get the bones of like things we sort of recognize in modern society. Like a society sort of built around the basic idea of God, that you sort of need the foundation of God to make anything else work. You can make like, behemoth corporations and tech companies and invent the Tesla, but like if you don't have sort of a moral foundation to your society, sort of God is this sort of thing that rises above it all, none of it's going to work. So this is what we're setting up here. Now, it's not so great for Moses, because Moses doesn't actually get to see all of his hard work here pay off with the Israelites becoming a great nation and ending up in Canaan and building the temple in Jerusalem and whatnot. He doesn't live long enough for all that to transpire. Now, eventually, after 40 years wandering in the desert, the Israelites will journey from Mount Sinai, where they are now, into the promised land of Canaan. But that doesn't happen yet. That'll happen 40 years later. During this time, they're still wandering the wilderness, reportedly due to their disobedience and their lack of faith in God. They're still learning how to have trust in God. And over the course of these 40 years, they say, they start kind of losing some of their commitments. They stop circumcising all the young males. And, you can sort of like wonder, like, why is God so obsessed with circumcision? Well, if you believe that God is obsessed with circumcision, and this is really important covenant, they kind of stop doing that. So they're wandering the desert, especially in the book of Numbers. We end up learning some of the trials, challenges, and episodes of rebellion they go through, all of which, God basically uses to delay their entry into the land that he had promised to them. So God's playing a game of cat and mouse here. You can believe in me fully, or if you don't, I'm going to make you keep wandering the desert, with sand in your eyes. Ultimately, it's not until the book, really, of Joshua, which happens after the Pentateuch, that the Israelites, led by then Joshua, after the death of Moses, finally end up crossing the Jordan River, which, by the way, you hear a lot about that in the Bible. The Jordan River is a tiny little river. Like, for a lot of its length, it really doesn't have any water in it. But, we're talking standards of ancient Middle East here. This was lush. They crossed the Jordan River and enter into the land of Canaan, marking the fulfillment of God's promise to give them that land as their inheritance, something he said to Abraham now some 500 years ago. But none of that's happening yet. Moses, at this point, here in 1406, dies. Moses never gets to see the full deliverance of the Israelites. Moses lived to be 120 years old. Deuteronomy 34 tells us that. It says, yet his eyes were not weak, nor his strength gone when he died. So who knows what he died of? So, poor Moses, hopefully he got to see it from the great above. This is kind of the sequence of things here that we've been through. The birth of Moses in 1526. So that sort of is at the kind of end of the 400 years of slavery. The Exodus from Egypt happens in 1446, so Moses is about 80 at that point. Basically, as soon as they get across the Red Sea, that Moses gives the law at Mount Sinai. And then they wander the desert here for 40 more years until 1406, which is when Moses dies, like right before they end up entering Canaan. Joshua comes to power, and that's a whole other set of stories. It's a whole book of the Bible dedicated to those stories. But we're not going to find out about them for 3 more books of the Bible, because the next books of the Bible get into the book of Leviticus, which is basically a whole bunch of rules, kind of the rules that God laid down outside the 10 Commandments that they had to operate by. And we'll talk about how arcane some of those rules are, seemingly, how incredibly detail-oriented some of those rules are. I mean, some of the rules are like, they're almost like, people can read them and almost like think they're amusing in the level of specificity over things that, like, why would God care? But we'll talk about the rationales in the context of, like, ancient society building. Why did God lay down all these rules in Leviticus? And as we said, Numbers tells the story of some of these, like, things that the Israelites were doing that was bad during these 40 years in the desert that delayed their entry into Canaan. And then Deuteronomy is kind of a recap. So Genesis and Exodus are really long books, and we've spent a lot of time on them. I think we're going to probably try to tackle Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy maybe in a single stream, because I think there's a lot more. There's a lot more we can kind of get through, I think, quickly in those. They're significant, but they are not as profound, deep, long epics that sort of tell these foundational stories of humanity like Genesis and Exodus. Now, Leviticus is all about rules. To a degree, they kind of can't help themselves, because God actually gets into a lot of very specific kind of crazy rules in Exodus as well. I mean, Exodus has plenty of its own very intense rules. And so I'm going to close this Bible stream just by sharing with you a few of the interesting lines and weird rules here that appear alongside some of these stories in Exodus that will hopefully whet your appetite a little bit for some of the things that are going to show up in Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. In Exodus 4, they give a very detailed description of circumcision, in which Zipporah took a flint and cut off the foreskin of her son and cast it at his feet and said, "Surely you are a bridegroom of blood to me." Imagine you're in, like, ancient Israel, and, like, your mom, like, takes just a piece of stone, cuts off your foreskin, and throws it at your feet and yells at you. Okay. One of the rules, Exodus 22. If a thief be found breaking up and be smitten that he die, there shall be no blood be shed for him. If the sun be risen upon him, there shall be blood shed for he should make full restitution. If he have nothing, then he shall be sold for his theft. Basically, this is kind of confusing language, but basically saying that if somebody, like, breaks into your house and steals stuff, they should be punished worse if they do it at night. Basically, like, if somebody breaks into your house at night and steals stuff from you, then you should kill them. Otherwise, you can kind of forgive him as long as he makes a full restitution. And these are some of these, like, rules, like, why would they have been that specific? And you have to sort of understand the context here. Like, night is an incredibly vulnerable time in ancient societies. I mean, it's a vulnerable time even today. you know, the homeowner's like asleep. It's almost like if you're going to steal, you're cheating by doing it at night. For one thing, it's harder to see. For another thing, like, you're supposed to respect people sleeping. So, like, you're not really supposed to steal at all. But if you do it at night, it's like especially bad, is God's point. In Exodus 23, God says, the first of the first fruits of thy land thou shalt bring into the house of the Lord thy God. Thou shalt not see the kid in his mother's milk. So in other words, no boiling a baby goat in its mother's milk, which does seem awfully cruel. When I was in the Middle East, one of the things we did is we went to a camel roast. Experience like camel meat. But we rode camels to get there. And something about that felt especially perverse when we tied up the camels, like outside the place where we were going to the camel roast. It just feels awfully perverse to like make the camels sort of watch from afar as we eat dead versions of their brethren, and then get back on them to ride back to the starting point. I guess if you're going to boil a baby goat, yeah, like have the decency to not boil it in its mother's milk. There's a lot of other rules here in Exodus in which God is very, very, very critical of people worshiping other gods. He's also very aggressive in punishing people doing things on the Sabbath. Exodus 31. 6 days may work be done, but in the seventh is the Sabbath of rest, holy to the Lord. Whoever doeth any work on the Sabbath day, he shall surely be put to death. So, if you do work on the Sabbath, you shall be put to death. And I saw somebody in here saying the Sabbath was really intended to be Saturday. There's been a lot of like trying to get the world all on like a single calendar. And so some of this stuff has shifted around. And I think the most important thing here is that like every 7 days you're supposed to take a break. Sort of in honor of, every 7 days you're supposed to honor the Lord above all else. So I don't know. I don't want to speak for God here. That would obviously be not what we want to do. But I guess that's the most important thing. Like a lot of parts of the Middle East used to have their weekend be like Thursday, Friday. Then they switched it to Friday, Saturday. And now a lot of it actually is switching to Saturday, Sunday. Just to kind of get all on the same page across the world. Anyway, God really does not like it if you don't keep the Sabbath. You should be put to death for it. That does seem like a very aggressive punishment. So sometimes people will like look at the Quran and talk about like the way the Quran is very very punitive for things like apostasy, leaving the Muslim faith. There's a lot in the Bible that says like there are a lot of things you can be put to death for in the Old Testament that are very intense if you read it literally. There are a lot of rules about slavery. There are, of course, not really rules saying you can't do slaves, but there are rules for how you have to have slaves. For instance, in Exodus 21, when you buy a Hebrew slave, he shall serve 6 years, and in the seventh he shall go free for nothing. So, I guess if you're a slave, you get 7 years. You get to put in your time, and then you go free. Okay, then some rules about killing an ox. Exodus 21. But if the ox has been accustomed to gore in the past, and its owner has been warned, but has not kept it in, and it kills a man or a woman, the ox shall be stoned, and its owner shall also be put to death. So this is like, people with dogs. Like, if you have like an unruly animal in your house, and you know that it has had like past incidents of being unruly, and you keep it anyway, and it ends up killing somebody, that's on you. Like, you got to kill the animal, and then you yourself got to be killed. A lot of killing. A lot of killing. James Dean says, Jesus is our Sabbath rest. Work on the Sabbath here and you die, but that is minor compared to trying to earn salvation and ignoring the rest in Christ. So these are some of the rules that show up in Exodus here. They get a lot more intense in Leviticus. And we will get into some of those, as well as some of the stories of Numbers, Deuteronomy, and then some of the histories that transcend beyond, where we move past this year 1406. Eventually, the histories of the Old Testament will take us to about the year 500. So we have about 900 years left of history. We've come a long way in the first two books of the Bible. I mean, we've really, literally gone from the start of the beginning of the earth to the year 1400 BC in two books. These are intense books. It has been a ride getting through Genesis and Exodus. But this is where we're going to pause and plan to come back on part 5 of the Bible stream. Not sure when we're going to get to it. And a lot more to get into here, guys, because we got to learn more about the foundations of society, and then we got to learn more history of the Israelites. And then we got some fun stuff in the Old Testament. Once we get through the histories, which, is interesting, but then we get into some really fun stuff with Psalms and Proverbs and Ecclesiastes, stories of Job. And then, of course, the Song of Solomon is coming up, and that's basically 50 Shades of Grey, Bible style, coming down the pike. So lots of very interesting stuff in the offing here. And we're going to try to, keep committed to this. I hope this has been interesting for people as we've continued to make our way through the Bible. Like I said, these first couple books take a lot of time. I think the pace is going to pick up here. Some of these books, not only do they cover a little bit less time each, they're just shorter. And, they show up a little bit less high on that proprietary ranking methodology. So we'll get through some of these a little, I think, faster. Not that they aren't all important to telling the comprehensive story, the very curated story of the Bible. The Bible is actually a very, very, very curated book. So, Song of Solomon mentions boobs, says Bequevius. That it does. It tells some detailed stories about love, and we'll talk about why. Like, why is this in the Bible? There is a reason for that. Okay. Way back when you asked what stream we wanted, and it was me that said the Bible. Land a bit right away on it. We did, and then it took us 2 years to actually do it. But now we're doing it, guys. So hang in with us. Make sure you're subscribed to our channel if you're not. Again, we don't do the Bible stream every night. We've been interchanging this with streams on other things because we actually do have a whole presidential election coming up here in a few months, and that's pretty significant. And we have other news, and we also like to tackle other things. We're going to do our dream stream here at some point in the near future, which is going to be a whole different kind of interlude. We've been doing some brackets. We did one of those the other week on random topics. And we take some walks. We did a State of the Union walk last week in Washington and got to see some very interesting stuff in D.C. So lots of stuff we're going to continue to try to get to in the coming days. Make sure you're subscribed. Bear with us. Reach out if you want. Again, we have our Discord channel on religion now up and running. So if you want to leave some of your thoughts about the Bible or react to the way that I've been talking about the Bible, I appreciate that too, guys. You guys know what's coming next. Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, Joshua, and then the histories of the Old Testament. I would love to get your thoughts about the sort of forthcoming streams. If you guys want to sort of give me some stuff to work with, I try to work it into our streams. I appreciate that. In addition to reactions on what we've already done. Again, we're trying to do this in a way that's kind of respectful to everyone, but also very accessible. So let me know your thoughts. I appreciate the engagement with these. I appreciate all the ducks here from Calming the Chaos, I'm Lurking, and Calming the Chaos again. And we'll get to some streams here in the near future where we do more chat stuff. So I appreciate all the comments from folks here in the chat. All right. So I appreciate the likes and subscribes. Make sure to thank our moderators if you haven't. They do a fantastic job. here on Land Speculation. And thanks to you guys for chatting with us. We'll be back. Don't be strangers. Real life is saying no. Oh, okay, that's in response to Bequeathus' question. That popped up like right as I was saying, don't be strangers. And real life is like, no. No, I got it. Okay, thanks guys. I appreciate it. We'll be back. Like, subscribe, Discord, Duck Fund, landspeculation@gmail.com is the email address. You guys know how to reach me and our mods. This is Land. That ain't just speculation, and for now I hope you guys all have a good night.
let's say you did go to Wonderland in 6 weeks.
Jesus.